Hey guys, what's going on? It's been a while since I last posted a video, a bit longer than I was expecting to. Wasn't intending to have a couple of months out from videos, and it's about time I got back on the video trail. So last week there was a joint event in London from Bistry and Infotopics, and I spoke at that event. And I need to post the workbook that I used for the presentation, and I thought what better way to kick off the videos again by backing up the workbook with a repeat of the presentation, so you guys can look at the workbook and get my presentation that goes along with it and understand what's going on. This one's going to be a little bit different than some of the previous videos, in that it's going to be less of a deep dive Tableau masterclass and more of an inspirational sort of thing. So hopefully this will give you some ideas, and you'll take away a few things from this. So, Tableau's best new feature. This was quite a bold title, but in my opinion, the feature that I'm going to be talking about in this presentation is going to be what is currently the best feature that Tableau produced in recent weeks. So let's have a look. In the actual presentation on the day, I spoke about the Tableau conference, doing a presentation with Simon Beaumont, Tableau Visionary, this year at Vegas, and our presentation then was all about interactivity within Tableau. And the reason I brought this up in the presentation was because this brand new feature wasn't part of our presentation in Vegas. We actually missed it out. We missed off this massive new feature. And the reason we missed it out was just purely from scheduling point of view. We didn't have time to talk about all the features in Tableau around interactivity and include this new feature and do it justice. So really it does need its own presentation all by itself, which is where this presentation comes into things. Clearly you must know me by now, but I'm Sam Parsons. I'm Group Analytics Cloud Lead for the Tableau partner and Salesforce partner that is Bistry, and I am one of the Tableau visionaries. So the new feature is, or the best new feature is, dynamic zone visibility. Absolutely love this. What I'm going to do with this presentation is just talk you through what it is, how it works, and the big point is take away some inspiration on what you could potentially do with dynamic zone visibility. Just as a bit of context, the presentation that I built this for was for a group of clients from Bistry and Infotopics, and there were very few Tableau developers in the room, so it's all quite high level, and so it's all about the inspiration, as I mentioned just before. So what is dynamic zone visibility? So some of you who are watching are probably going to be new to this, and I'm going to talk through generally what it is and how it came about, but to do that we need to have a little bit of a history lesson with Tableau. So if we go back to 2019, Tableau introduced a new feature called Show Hide. We generally refer to it as Show Hide containers, but it's not necessarily limited to containers. So Show Hide was a feature that allowed you to attach a button to any object on your dashboard, but that object had to be floating. So there's a bit of a lesson point here. If you're new to Tableau, an object could be a chart, it could be a text box, it could be a picture, or it could be a container which is used to hold other objects. And you can attach a button to that, but you could only attach the button if that object was floating. So by floating I mean any object that is layered on top of the dashboard and not fixed to the dashboard itself. So if you think of like your design apps like Figma or Adobe Illustrator, you work in layers. Think of that in terms of floating on Tableau dashboards. Now there's an issue though with or there was an issue back in 2019 when they introduced the Show Hide buttons with floating objects only, because Tableau best practices teach us that when building out dashboards, especially for something in a business context, you want to go through and build your dashboards in a tiled manner. By tiled, I mean putting the objects directly onto the dashboard itself, ideally within containers, because that allows you to control the sizing and the reaction of your dashboards in a much more controlled manner. The reason for that is, if back in 2019, if you were to float objects and then publish your dashboards to Tableau Server or Tableau Cloud, you potentially would find that some of those floated objects might move in terms of its position slightly, and as a Tableau designer, that's nothing more infuriating to design something that you think is pixel perfect, upload it and it's not quite right. The other issue with floated objects is that if you have a tendency or a will to build your dashboard so that they will automatically change size depending on the screen that's viewing them, then your floated objects will react very differently than what you expect them to. So it's quite limiting from a business point of view if you are following best practices, having this new feature that is only assigned to floating objects. But that didn't stop the Tableau community, and the Tableau community, like always, get quite creative with these things, and they took the challenge on and came up with solutions, many different solutions, but one of the most successful or the most useful was one like this. So if we look at this dashboard here, if we look down in the bottom right hand corner, there's a little star there. That little star is a button that is connected to a floating object, and if I were to select that button, it will introduce an overlay on top of the dashboard that is giving more detail on how to use that dashboard. So this is an explanatory overlay or explanatory layer to your dashboards. These are fantastically useful, and you can build them in any sorts different ways you want to. At the moment that I've built this as just an image, so I've taken a screenshot of the dashboard, brought it into another tool, annotated around or over the top of that, saved that as an image that fits the same size as the dashboard, and brought that in as an image floating over the top of the dashboard that is then connected to that button using the show hide feature. And what this is really helpful for is it's just lowering that level for people to adopt your dashboards or use your dashboards. You don't have to run training on every new dashboard that you deliver. You can introduce these explanatory overlays that will give all the detail to where the certain buttons are or what different features on the dashboard are doing within the dashboard itself, so you don't actually have to deliver training or record videos to explain things to new users. So very helpful. If we forward a couple of years through the pandemic to 2021, Tableau responded to the community again, and they developed on top of this show hide feature for floating, and they developed it further, and they created it or opened it up to be available for tiled objects as well. So this was really crucial because tiled is how we like to build in best practices with our business dashboards, and what this allows us to do is we can now control areas on our dashboard with buttons that are tiled and have different reactions to what's happening. So for example, again, the community came up with ideas such as this. If I were to select on this icon up in the top right hand corner, I would open up a floating container that contains a few more icons. Okay, so that's the old show hide button. But these icons here are connected to different areas on our dashboard, and I can use the show hide button, which I've just realised I haven't explained what a show hide button actually does. A show hide button turns on or off an object from your dashboard, so it brings it in or out of your view. Probably a crucial point I should have explained earlier. It's been over a week since I did the presentation, so I've probably forgotten the flow of it. But so a show hide container brings objects in or out of the view. So here we have three icons, one that refers to the KPI cards, one that refers to the bar chart and one refers to the table. These are now connected, these are the buttons that are connected to these objects that are tiled. And the difference here with floating is that if I turn off an object, the remaining objects on the dashboard, if they're within the same container, will change size and fill the remaining space that has been left by the object that's taken away. Okay, so in this instance, if I no longer want my KPI cards at the top, this button is linked to a horizontal container that holds all of the KPI cards and all of the sheets that are within building each of those. And I can turn those off in one single click. That container, that horizontal container for the KPI cards, is held within another container that also holds these two charts or tables below. So if I turn off the KPI cards, you'll see that the charts below will react and fill the space. So if I click on that, you can see that these now have moved and filled the space, the vertical space that was left. So this is really helpful because what you can now do is effectively you can create a zoom function by just selecting or turning off different objects on your dashboard as and when you need them. So it gives the user more power to really focus in on the insights that they want. For the example, we've got this table here. This table scrolls left and right because we can't fit everything into this space. So if I wanted to view the table in full, I could turn off the chart on the left hand side, close down this pop-up window, and then you can now see that we have the table fully shown. There's no scroll bars in here. I'm using the full dashboard size. So this is absolutely fantastic. 2021, that was a real major change for how we can build dashboards and how dashboards react to our user interactions. So we're really putting the interactivity to the forefront for the end users or stakeholders. Let's fast forward another year to last year, November time. And this is where dynamic zone visibility was introduced. Now the difference here between show hide buttons that are tiled and dynamic zone visibility is that dynamic zone visibility makes that link between that same feature of turning objects on and off, but it connects it to either the data or to a parameter that you have created in the workbook. And both the data or the parameter, so the data as in a calculation that is looking at your data and reacting to that, or the parameter, both of those need to be Boolean results, so true or false results. So this is a real step forward because you can now control an area on your dashboard or a zone using a parameter or the data behind it. And this is going to open up so many different use cases that hopefully I'll show a few of them in the rest of this presentation for that inspiration piece. But the other point is those zones on your dashboard, you can connect them more than one zone to the same calculation or the same parameter. So you could have one action where you update a parameter to close down multiple zones all at once. So if we think about this zoom function that we had before, where we were clicking to open up a menu, clicking to close down the zones, clicking to close down the menu again, just to zoom into the table. Well, we can do exactly the same thing with a single click using a dynamic zone visibility feature. So we have a sheet here that's created an icon, and on that sheet, when I click on that, there's a parameter action that will fire, that will update a parameter to send, or to update a couple of parameters to decide which zones to turn on and off. Have I clicked on this icon or have I clicked on this icon? Okay. So if I click on this, what's going to happen is it's going to send the result of false to the parameter that controls the horizontal container with the KPI cards, and then it will also send false to the parameter that controls the zone for the bar chart, meaning that both zones close down instantly, leaving the space to be filled by the table. So I click on that, you'll see that the table opens up and both those zones close down. Immediately we've saved 4 or 5 clicks just to get the same reaction as we had before. Now that's fantastic, but it's not just about saving clicks. We could go a step further with this. For example, if we were to look at this chart on the bottom left hand corner, I'll zoom on this so it makes it easier for you to see. So down the left hand side we've got sales and years. The sales are the vertical size of the bars. I've used a complex chart here, generally probably wouldn't use this in business terms, but when building for presentations I tend to like to have a little fun on these things. But essentially we've got the bars on here are vertically sized by sales and horizontally sized by number of orders. Okay, so we've got some information already on here. We can see the years, we can see the sales values, and we can see the orders as part of an axis. We can also see the letters that represent the months of the year. So we can see we've got 4 years and all 12 months of the year. Now, if I come out of this and I zoom in on this chart, not only will it click on the click of this button turn off the KPI card in the table, but we'll notice that the chart itself will fill the space and essentially zoom in. Take a close look at the detail that is being shown on the chart. So if I click on this, it opens up. We can now see on this chart that we've now got a little bit more detail. We've got in here, we've got reference bands appearing at the end of each year, telling us the total number of orders per year, but we've also got labels appearing on the top of each of the bars to give us the detail as to what the bars are. Now, I've just fired off an action, but essentially if I was to try and sort of review this chart and look at it in any detail, make any comparisons, it's going to be incredibly difficult. It's a pretty bad chart to make any comparisons from. So for example, if I was to look at November and trying to compare year on year the sales and the orders, it's ridiculously hard. You wouldn't be able to do it just by looking at it. So you'd need to introduce something that will be able to help you make that piece of analysis. So I have a hover highlight that's going on here, so I can highlight those November years, but it also fires off a Visin tooltip at the bottom there. And that Visin tooltip is taking those bars and layering them one on the other. Again, we can use dynamic zone visibility here to help us. So at the bottom of the Visin tooltip, you can see right at the bottom here, we've got zoom in on this chart. If I was to click on that, I can make this Visin tooltip chart appear on my screen, and when it loads, it becomes interactive. I've now got axes, I've now got tooltips. So I've basically gone from a chart in a single dashboard to zoom in on that chart to make to give more detail to the chart. So essentially what's happening with the more detail is it's saying what's happening with the parameters that are controlling the dynamic zones. If this chart is the single chart essentially on has been zoomed in on, then show extra labels, show extra reference lines. And then what we're doing is we're saying, okay, we want to give the user more context or the ability to read the chart better with a Visin tooltip, which is essentially a small version of what we're seeing here. And then we are using dynamic zone visibility to open up a duplicate of that chart that is layered on top of the dashboard, floating to the full size of the dashboard. And when we select on the Visin tooltip, it will open up that full size version of the Visin tooltip chart with the extra detail, and that's layered over the top of the dashboard at the moment. So effectively, it looks like you've just zoomed in on that tooltip. And then if we click twice at the top here, I just randomly notice that we can close it down by clicking twice on the title. So as a real introduction to dynamic zone visibility, we've gone from floated only objects controlled by a button, tiled only objects controlled by a button, but each object has to be controlled by different buttons individually, so you have lots of clicking around, to dynamic zone visibility, which is connecting to your data or your parameters, as long as they are Boolean, and those parameters or the calculations can control multiple zones at once. But not only control zones, but you can then connect them to the detail that you're showing in your charts. So we've now just shown that we can zoom in on the chart with a single click and then go further into the analysis using Visin tooltips. Now you understand what dynamic zone visibility is and show some of the power of it, let's have a look a little bit more about some inspiration that we could take or we could use dynamic zone visibility for. So helper panes, or are they helper panes? Helper panes are those little panels that we like to build on the side of our side or top of our dashboards that hold a lot of the useful information that our users want to get to. Now, it seems a bit contradictory to hide all that useful information away in a helper pane, and the reason we do that is we like to clean up our dashboards so that we maximize the space on the dashboards for the insight that we want to give the users. We don't want to clutter it up with filters and legends and such like. Now, they have their usefulness, but if you're constrained by the size of your dashboarding, then you tend to, or you may wish to, hide away those extra controls until you really need to use them. So we use helper panes or helper panels, and if we were to click on the button here, this is a show hide button that is tiled, and it would open up our panel with all the extra information like filters, parameters, legends. And when we open that up, this is a very common situation where some of our charts become utterly useless because they've contracted. The size that is devoted to them has been taken away, and so the charts don't react particularly well to being put into a small area. You can see down here we can't read the table. You can see on these gauge charts that the build is kind of lost on them. Some of the needles are particularly small, some become particularly long, and they sort of overlap a little bit, so it's all a bit useless. If you were trying to embed your dashboards for your company to your website or some sort of portal that external customers might be looking at, you really want to show off your dashboards in the best light possible. Showing dashboards that react like this really demystifies the build of what you've done, and it just looks clunky and unprofessional. So this is where dynamic zone visibility can help you. If we were to change that button and make that a sheet that will fire off a parameter, when we open up our helper pane, we can do something with the charts on the right hand side that will just feel a little bit cleaner. So if I open up my helper pane, I can, on that same click, I can turn off those charts that become so truncated that they become unreadable. Just cleans up the whole thing. You can then bring them back when you close down your helper pane. That's one way of dealing with them. Another way would be to create a notification or change the chart build. So if we look at the gauge charts to start with, if we click on this button and we fire off the dynamic zone visibility, we can swap out the gauge chart with a text box that gives a notification to say this space is too small to show the regional targets. Close the helper pane to reveal the insight. So we're showing that there is something here, but you can't read it at the moment. Now obviously you can set up how this looks to whatever your preference is, but this is just quickly how I did it for the presentation. If I close this down again, we'll just have a little look at the table. The table at the moment is fitting quite nicely. We've got our little scroll bar at the right hand side to go up and down the table. When we open up this, before that table was becoming so truncated you couldn't read the numbers, but what we're doing here is we're actually now swapping the table out for a different build of the table. And this table here now allows you to scroll left and right. So effectively what we've done is we've done the old sheet swap, but the original table was set so it was fit to the width of the space. This table is set to be standard size, so that you would end up having the horizontal scroll bar and the vertical scroll bar at the same time. Two different setups. You can't control that directly with dynamic zone visibility, but you can create two different tables, two different worksheets that you swap in and swap out. Now you might say, well, we used to have sheet swapping before, we used to use parameters for that, and that worked absolutely fine, so that's nothing revolutionary. No, it's not, but the difference is with the parameter, the old sheet swap, you used to have to create a calculation to do that, then add it as into your filters, then set that up with to get the right reaction, and then drive that off of an action. With this, it's just purely driving off the sheets with the parameter. There's no calculation behind it, so they fire off quicker than what they were doing before when you had data or connecting it to the data. So it's just slightly quicker, and it's probably easier to set up. Now, I showed this off before on one of my videos, and this was part of the presentation last week. And this is just showing how, again, I'll go over it if you haven't watched the video before. It's just going through how you could start creating more app-like experiences. We are so used to using apps in our everyday life, going to websites and seeing that web design and how all the controls and the panels and the menus react on websites. So we have this expectation now in modern day life on how anything on our computer or on our phone should react. So Tableau needs to be moved into that space. Dynamic zone visibility allows us to do that. Previously, with the show hide buttons, if you were to open up a menu from your helper pane, before you could open up a different menu, you would have to close down the previous one. Or if you did open up a second menu, it would overlap. They would both remain open until you closed one of the menus down. That's particularly quite clunky and not very functional for the end user, and it just doesn't feel quite app-like. Whereas with dynamic zone visibility, what you can do now is you can connect the parameters so that you understand that if I'm clicking on a different menu icon, I can open up the menu that I'm clicking on and close down any of the other menus by sending off a true statement to the menu that I want to open and sending off false to any others that are currently set to true. This is currently set to true, so when I click on this, it will send false to the container that's holding that menu information, and it will send true to this container that's holding this menu information. So on the one click you can control two different areas like we've shown before, but it then creates a much more app-like feel to the dashboard navigation or menus. And again, just to sort of reiterate on the sheet swapping element here, it's going to be a bit easier to sort of show you in this. We have a table here, and we can set up another button that will fire off and do a little sheet swap, so we can see the same information by bar charts. It's quite a common thing in certainly working for a lot of different businesses in client work, is that people still want to see their tables, but they also have users that much prefer to see it in a visual form. So you tend to build these solutions in both ways and allow the end user to have the option to view it in whichever way they want to. So it's just useful to know that you can do that. Now, that's not the end of what you can do with dynamic zones. So here we have our dashboard that we looked at before, but this time I'm a user and I can see that I've got some KPIs at the top, and I want to dive into some of those KPIs in a little bit more information. So I can click on the profit KPI, change the information down here that seems to be sales related, and change the views to be more profit oriented. So here I've got a container that holds profit specific charts that comes into view when I click on my profit KPI. Ignore the build, I couldn't be bothered to fix that for the presentation. The customer, maybe I want to have a look at the customer's information, and again I can set up a view just for the customers. So dive into that information in a little bit more detail, and obviously I can go back and to the original view if I want to. So this is particularly powerful to help your users dive into the data into more detail. You can use the single dashboard to do a lot of things and essentially show off a little bit about how you can use Tableau in your own businesses. Now, I said that a lot of that stuff that I've been showing is all parameter led. Said that we can have it to be data led. This is where notifications come into their own. So you can create a notification. I think I picked this up from Tableau Conference from I think it was a tip battle from Heidi, and but essentially you can have a window pop up in front. You can set this notification sort of text box to appear when a certain condition in your data has been met. So for example, you've got new dates in your data, so you could have something that fires to say, is there a new date? Yes. Open up this window to say the data has been updated today. Or maybe it's a certain day of the month that your data gets refreshed. Just let your users know that something has changed. Maybe there's a condition in your data to say there's a certain threshold that's been met. Make it a notification. Make it like a warning or some sort of signal to say you want to pay attention to this. Something's happened. Now this appears on top of the dashboard. You can't really interact with the dashboard because it's in the way, so you can close it away by clicking on an icon that you create that will close down that zone, and then you can get back into your dashboard and play around with your dashboard as you see fit. Now how this works is that just because you've closed it down here doesn't mean that it couldn't come back up again, because you would have had the saved version on your server or on your Tableau Online would automatically have that box available ready to be updated depending on the conditions of the calculation. We can take this a step further by doing zone specific alerting. So you could create icons that are floated over the corners of all of your chart elements on your dashboard. They could be closed away by default until a certain condition of that chart is met. It could be that your data is trending downwards, and then it will appear and it will give you an interactive message to say something's happening here, you want to have a look at this. Maybe it could be that you've hit a threshold, like I said, and you have a little icon appear. It's just to draw the eye of the user and the attention of the user to something critical that you think is worth them looking at, help guide them to the important parts of the analysis. Those are just some of the ideas that I threw together, and obviously we have a big community in Tableau, and so it would be remiss of me not to look at the Tableau community and think, okay, well, what have other people come up with, and let's show you some of our ideas. So the day before I put the presentation, or did the presentation, I got tagged by Chira here, who they tagged me on Twitter with a new dashboard that they had created. So I thought, great, that's perfect timing. Let's include that as an example of what we can do. So this is Chira, and this, if you want to follow them, then you can follow them on Twitter. I'm not even sure if I've got that correct. But I close that down, so that's again the notification window. And what Chira has done is they've created these little plus buttons on their KPI cards. These plus buttons can be selected and you can dive into more detail onto the KPI card. So whereas I had created a different dashboard view at the bottom with the KPI cards staying as they are, this, if you click on this, will open up that KPI card to fully fit the size of the dashboard. So he's doing that zoom element of closing down the other elements on the dashboard, but bringing in another chart to give you the detail behind these numbers here, which is quite a nice little effect. We've got the same that can happen on any of these KPI cards. They'll all open and close as before. Now, a little known member of the community, a guy called Andy Kriebel, I picked this up from Tableau Public that I believe he created, or if he wasn't the first person to create that, then I apologise, but I picked it up from his site. And what we've got here is we've got a straightforward bar chart that's showing us, I guess it's the sales by category. And what we want to do is we want to understand what's behind those sales or profit a little bit more. So if we were to select on a bar, then what we've got here is with dynamic zone visibility, we are opening up more information about the sales for that category. So essentially it's like a KPI card appearing in the middle of your bar chart. So we can see the history of his sales. We can see how much profit is associated to those sales, and what are the top 5 states making the sales. So all key information that can be brought in to answer questions as and when the user needs it. And you can close this down by selecting on the marks again, and then you can pick any other one and it'll open up. Essentially how this is built, if you go to Andy's Tableau Public profile, you can probably download this and see how it's built. But essentially we've got one worksheet for the top bar chart, one worksheet for the bottom bar chart, and then a container holding these worksheets in between. And essentially what's happening is we're working out where we've clicked, what categories we need to show in the top chart, what categories we need to show in the bottom chart, and bring in or take away the container showing the extra detail. So very effective. Last community sort of showcase here, we've got Pradeep. Pradeep Kumar G was in the same year as my Iron Viz final. He came third that year, and he's super well known in the community for creating really gorgeous designed dashboards like this. If you want to know how this is built, essentially there's an image that's placed onto the dashboard that has all the boxes or the tiles here that's been created probably using Figma or Adobe Illustrator, and then he's floating on top of that all the charts. But what Pradeep has done with dynamic zone visibility is, again, down in this corner, like Andy, if you click on a bar, then you'll get some some extra action happening. So if we click on wages here, dynamic zone will be opened up or fired. So we now have a KPI card that appears on the dashboard that gives us a little bit more information about the wages. It's very similar to what Andy's done, but what Pradeep has done particularly well here is that notice how the rest of the dashboard is greyed out or becomes murky so you can't see it. What he's really doing here is he's putting the data that you're interacting with and the additional data that he wants you to look at the real forefront of to catch your attention. You will really focus in on these two elements because everything else is greyed out. So it's a really good way of guiding your end users to what they need to look at. Otherwise, you might well have missed that there would be a pop-up of a KPI card over the top of this bar chart. You possibly could miss that, it wouldn't be obvious. So really good stuff from the three of them. Understand what we've gone through quite a lot in terms of what's possible for dynamic zone visibility. So this is essentially what we've been doing. So we've been looking at chart zoom, so clicking on an icon in the corner of the chart to turn off the other zones on the dashboard so your chart fills that space. in a single click. We can also control, as and when we are zooming in on a chart, increasing the level of detail that we're showing on that chart, because we have more space to show more detail. And when we close down the chart to make it smaller, that detail goes away, so it becomes a much more simple chart. That's all using parameters. We can zoom in on a Visin tooltip. So we've had a Visin tooltip appear that gives a bit more information. We can click on that and open up a full version of that Visin tooltip so that we can get an interactive version of it. We've talked about how some charts can be truncated to become particularly useless, so we can hide them, so we can understand how our dashboards are going to react to different interactions, and we can control what the end user is seeing. We can introduce messages or notifications in that same instance. We can swap charts, the old sheet swapping thing, but using dynamic zone visibility, so we're not having to write any calculations to do that. Makes it much quicker to do. We've looked at creating app-like menu functionalities that we're much more used to seeing in modern day life through websites and such like, so we can start building our Tableau dashboards to be more like what people would expect them to react. Customize the views so we can interact with certain elements to change the major part of the dashboard, to introduce specific views for the element that you've clicked on. So we looked at the KPI cards, clicking on those, changing the charts underneath to be specific to those KPIs. Dashboard notifications, so driven off your data, maybe it's a data alert, say you've gone past a threshold, bring up a big notification front and center in the dashboard to catch the user's attention, and they have to read it or close it down before they can continue. And we've got data-led chart alerting, so we've done this in the top corners of each of the chart, or we've floated an icon like a bell icon to really just draw attention to where the user wants to look at on a dashboard. We've also saw from Jira where we've had KPI zooming, so you can click on a KPI and it will open that KPI in full and give the underlying information about that KPI. We saw from Andy where you can drill into more information about a straightforward chart or metric, where we've got the bar chart. You click on the sales bar and it will open up to give you the full or further information about that bar or that metric. And then from Pradeep we've had the pop-up KPI cards that come into the view and really focus the user's attention on that KPI card and the chart that you've interacted by graying out the rest of it. So lots of different examples of how you can use dynamic zone visibility, lots of inspiration to take away. So, nice cheesy photo from the Tableau conference. What do you want to take away from this? First thing is how flexible dynamic zone visibility is, and essentially you're just limited by your own imagination on what you want to do. If you have issues within your company around showing off Tableau or getting Tableau adoption, then you can make some sort of showcase dashboards with your own data and introduce the dynamic zone visibility to those dashboards to impress those stakeholders to get buy-in on your reporting. It really helps also, it helps your end users with their guided analytics. You can really control how your users are going about your dashboard, where they're looking, with alerts, with focusing on certain charts. And it also helps with decluttering your dashboards as well. If you want to give that extra bit of information but you don't have room on your dashboard, you can bring it in at a click of a button. And essentially it's just added sophistication to your dashboarding. And I think the key point behind this is easy. If you can understand the logic of a true or false statement, understand the logic of when I click on this icon, I want this area to become false, this area to become true. If you could get your head around the logic of what you're trying to do from a true-false perspective, it's really simple to write. And that was the end of my presentation. that I delivered on Tuesday last week. Now the last point I'm probably going to just let you know is when we go back, so this wasn't part of the presentation, but when we go back to this dashboard here, essentially all I'm doing on this dashboard, there's no real difficult calculations being written here. On this icon where I create my zoom, this little icon is a worksheet. That worksheet has two calculations. One calculation that is written simply as true, and the other calculation is written as false. Just two statements, two separate calculations. What's happening is, when I click on that icon, I'm sending off a parameter action that takes the false that has been put onto detail, that calculation that says false, that's put on the detail, and I'm taking that and I'm essentially preloaded false onto the icon, onto the worksheet, and I'm taking that preloaded false and I'm sending it to the dynamic zone parameter that controls the KPI parameters and the parameter that controls the table parameter. It's as simple as that. And then there'll be other cases where I'll send true to something else, such as where were we? Like this app like controls. So for example, if I were to click on here, again this is preloaded with a true or a false calculations that are put onto detail. When I click on this, it will send true to this container to open this up. If I were to click on this one, it would send true to the container that's it wants to open up next, and it will send false to the container that's already open. It's very straightforward, and I just wanted to reiterate that there's no real difficult calculations that you're writing. There will be cases that you might want to write something to say, if this parameter is already true, then give me false. But again, that's not difficult. That's just a straightforward if statement. And I think we'll probably leave it there for the video. So it's been a while since I've done a video. There will be some more videos coming up that I'm going to do in the same light as before, a bit more technical. So maybe I'll show you how we can interact with that Visin tooltip to open up a bigger version of it. There's stuff from the Tableau conference where we had an interactive Visin tooltip where you could click on buttons in that tooltip and have the tooltip itself change. There's different ways and different things that I could probably show you. Another nice one actually is these KPI cards. They're built in a single sheet with no map layers. It's just a straightforward Tableau worksheet, this KPI card here. So maybe I'll go through and show you how to build those as well. But if you've made it this far to the end of the video, thank you very much. Appreciate you watching as always, and just want to say also thank you for everyone's feedback on the previous videos. It's been fantastic. I've had so much lovely, really reaffirming sort of responses to the videos, so thank you everybody.